Hello and welcome. I am Elizabeth Rose Hoffman, illustrator to the children's book Sadie Stitches by Heather Carter. And today on Stages Behind the Pages, I'm going to share with you some storyboarding and other stuff. And if you haven't seen the first episode to this series, I linked it down below in the description. In that episode, we went over a lot of the topics about the first steps an illustrator takes when getting ready to work with an independently published author. The first step I like to do when preparing to do storyboarding is read the manuscript again and go over it several times. Usually I'm marking it up, trying to figure out where are the best places to split text onto different spreads. A lot of times I have to really think really hard and imagine different scenes. So as I'm reading through it, I'm marking out boxes, trying to figure out what text is going to go on what spread and where to divide out spreads between other spreads. Also, side note, when I say spread, I mean 2 pages side by side. A page is just one side of a spread. This hair really wants to get in my mouth. When parsing out sections of the manuscript, I like to find key spots in the text that would potentially leave the reader hanging to want to turn the page to find out what happens next. So I always like to make sure I include that in every story I make. I feel like every well-told children's story has that. I like to call it the surprise factor. So one thing I like to consider when parsing out all the text in the manuscript, I always feel like it's good to have a sense for the tempo. And I know tempo is usually referred to when making music or listening to music, playing along with music, but I like to think that books also have a tempo. When you're opening up a scene and then turning a page to another scene, there's like a pause. It's a forced pause, and I like to think of that as a tempo. So a lot of times when parsing out the manuscript, I like to consider the tempo of how many words is going to be on the spread versus how much art. Sometimes I'll divide out the tempo by maybe there's not as many words, but maybe the art is more detailed, and so even though there's not much to read, the reader will want to look around and see all the detail that's happening. Maybe there's hidden objects or something in the spread. And then once they're satisfied, they'll turn the page. Maybe that one has a lot of text on it. So then they're like reading all the text, but also maybe it has only a simple spot illustration. So they look at it like, oh, okay, turn the page. So as I'm working through the manuscript, I like to consider the tempo of the page turning. A lot of well-designed children's stories are told really well when they have a nice tempo of the page turn. Also, in this stage of parsing out the manuscript into spreads, it dictates the number of pages the book could have. And I say could have because there has happened to me several times. I'm right in the middle of rendering all the art, and my editor gets back to me and she's like, hey, so I really feel like it needs to be an extra spread here. It just needs something more pow, you know? And I'm like, oh, well, okay. So then I have to add 2 whole pages because 2 pages equals 1 spread. So if I'm doing a whole extra spread, I have to add in 2 pages. And from my experience so far, when making a picture book, you always have to land the page count on an even number. You can't do an odd number. It won't print properly. So whenever I'm outlining the book and laying it out, I always have to make sure, well, actually, before I even do anything like that, when I'm doing the storyboard, that's when I need to figure out and make sure that there is an even number of pages when I'm finishing the storyboard. Usually when laying out the number of pages for a book, I like to start off by trying to aim for 32 pages, which is 16 spreads. 32 pages is usually the number of pages I like to stick to when storyboarding a book. But from my experience so far, usually that number gets passed up pretty fast. As someone who works with primarily independently published authors, I try to keep the page count as low as I can. The lower the page count I can keep it, the more inexpensive the book will be to print and sell. So in the end, if a scene or 2 can be combined into one scene, then it can be done without compromising the storytelling experience, then I like to do that as much as I can. But in the end, the story needs to be told well, and if that means an extra page or extra spread or 2, then so be it. So after I've done all my storyboarding, a lot of the storyboarding steps, and I've become really familiar with the manuscript, I like to usually touch base with the author before officially sending her the storyboard. I'll touch base with her. Sometimes I'll do this later if the idea hits me, but a lot of times I try to touch base with them with some different ideas to add into the illustrations that the text itself doesn't talk about. Like for an example, with this story, Sadie Stitches, I was probably about halfway through rendering all the art, and I had this brilliant idea. And I touched base with the author about it, and she was all about it. What we ended up doing, I asked her, I was like, hey, like with the bunny family, in the story, there's only the two sisters and the mother. And I was like, is there other members to the bunny family? And she said, yes, there's two brothers and a father bunny. So I ended up adding in several of the scenes in the background sightings of the brother bunnies and the father bunny. And then also some photographs on the wall of the whole family, or the father and the mother bunny in a photo. So it was just kind of fun adding those little hidden things that you could find, like, oh look, this is actually a picture of the whole family. And then also I added under this one bench in this one spot illustration, 6 pairs of boots. In the text there's only 3 characters, but in the beginning you're like, hey, like you don't see any sightings of any other bunnies yet, and this is in the very beginning of the story. You see 6 boots, and so I love foreshadowing. If you don't know what foreshadowing is, it is where in a story there is hinting to something that could happen later on. And so when that thing happens that's later on, that event or whatever happens, you realize, oh my gosh, that they're hinting at that earlier in the story. And so even though maybe that's more of something that happens traditionally in more of a novel type book or fiction book or a biography or whatever, with the 6 boots under the bench, I like to see that as foreshadowing, because like, oh hey, look, there's 6 pairs of boots, that means there's more characters coming. I love including things that people can find in the illustrations. It really gets the reader involved in the story and really gets them excited about seeing what they can find in the illustrations. Well, in this episode, it just so happens I've run out of time to go into the actual storyboarding itself, but we did cover all the other stuff. So without further delay, I shall say farewell to all of you, and stay tuned for the next episode of Stages Behind the Pages. Until then, God bless. Pretty much the original story for this one. Super simple. This is a more detailed one. Now when a book opens up, there's like a gutter right there,
One, two.